Okay, this is for History 131, Chapter 17, which is called Industrial Supremacy. And that title, I think, has like a double meaning. I think a lot of these titles sometimes have double meanings. It's the only place the writer, like Alan Brinkley, has a chance to fool around with words. Everything else has to be straight. You know? He used to have a chapter called the Imperial Republic, which if you think about it, imperialism, empires, and republics do not go together. So there was a kind of I don't know what you call it there, maybe an oxymoron. But industrial supremacy, I think, refers to two different things. One is that within the United States, industry, factories, manufacturing, capitalism, industrial capitalism, are becoming dominant. And agriculture and country living are becoming less dominant. And this is happening in the United States. The big population centers are all industrial areas: New York, Philadelphia, Detroit, Chicago. And the populations are there. There's a great deal of immigrants coming into the city. And when those people get the vote, those areas become more politically powerful. And farmers and such start to feel like they're going to lose out, and in a sense they are. Okay, you take a census every 10 years, and that's how you apportion representatives in the Congress and electoral votes, etc. The other meaning of industrial supremacy is that the United States. The Industrial Revolution starts in England, maybe as early as the 1760s. But by the period we're talking about, France is sort of industrialized in a sort of different way, but Germany is highly industrialized. Japan is highly industrialized. A little later, Russia will make an attempt at industrialization. But the United States is now one of the top industrial countries. I think England is probably still on top, and then Germany or the United States is right below it. So what do you mean by industrial supremacy in this case is, well, the way the chapter is set up, I kind of find it interesting because they go through all these inventions first. The ideas that inventors come up with, stuff like, the light bulb. It's such a great idea, it becomes the symbol for a great idea. And I'm just going to run through these. I'm not going to run down all the details, but there are things like the telephone gets developed. 1900. By 1900, there were 1.35 million telephones, and by 1920, there were 13.3 million telephones. Anybody want to guess how many telephones are in the country today? Those are all wired. Those are phones that hang on the wall and have a wire to the switching station. No cell phones. Radio is being developed, although it's not capable of like broadcasting voices and music and stuff yet. Office equipment, the cash register, the calculating or adding machine, the late 1800s. It's not only the light bulb, of course. You need electricity to power the light bulb, and that's they mentioned two guys, Charles Brush and Thomas Edison, as pioneers in not only inventions like the light bulb that use electricity, but promoting the actual generation of electricity, so that cities can have lights on the street, and building power plants and that kind of stuff. I like to point out this language that they use. It says Edison and others designed improved generators and built large power plants to furnish electricity to whole cities. Okay, what that sentence says is Edison, with others, built large power plants. But I don't think he ever got out there in coveralls, laying bricks for the power plants. The others, in this case, could be like immigrant Italian laborers, or the workers built the power plants, not Edison. Okay, I brought this up years ago, and a student said to me, "But that's the way we talk." And I said, "Yeah, that's the problem." We sort of give credit to the financiers and the managers, and when it's actually workers doing the work, it makes the workers invisible. There's a whole thing about iron and steel production, which is really important because up to a certain point, skilled steel workers were the people that knew how to make steel. The bosses, the owners of the factory, didn't know how to make steel. They didn't know the recipes. And so they were really dependent on these skilled workers, which gave the skilled workers power. And when these new methods come in, the open hearth method and the Bessemer method, it allows the owners to sort of take control of the whole process and reduce the skilled workers to a condition of unskilled workers. Of course, if you're making giant pieces of steel, you need transportation for that. And to get the iron ore from Minnesota across the Great Lakes and down to Pennsylvania to Pittsburgh, you need transportation for that. Steamships are becoming very efficient and important. Now this is funny. I'm going to hold up this picture for a little bit, see if we can see it. This is a celebration of the opening of a tunnel under the Hudson River. And it's not in the 9th edition, right? But it's in the 7th edition. And what I think is interesting is, the people sitting at the tables are, fat cats, as we would call them, capitalist fat cats. The only worker type person is this African American guy who is serving the tables. All these guys are dressed up in their tuxes. Okay. So the sandhogs dig the tunnel and they get the credit. They get in the pictures. There are probably pictures of the sandhogs as well, but the automobile and the airplane, research and development. There's a guy named Taylor who starts to organize production so that it's more and more efficient. And workers actually call that speed up. You're working the same amount of time, but you're producing more because of efficiency moves. It makes the work more intense. I worked on an automobile assembly line in the late 70s, early 80s, and it was very intense work, the most intense work I ever did. I'm sorry about this cough. I don't cough until I push the red button, and then I start coughing. Railroads are the biggest industries in the country, the biggest business organizations in the country. and they're expanding very rapidly in this late 19th century period. And they're also changing the way businesses are organized. It's very expensive to build a railroad. You need a lot of capital, even before you sell the first ticket. And in order to raise that capital, they start organizing or using the corporate form where you sell shares of stock to people. And that's how you get your capital. And then they share in the profits, all right? Again, it's one of the magical things about capitalism is that you can invest some money, some extra money that you have, and get part of the profit without doing any work or having anything to do with railroads, right? There's another section here about it's kind of a bizarre thing. I might do this in two parts. I know I promised you a second half of the chapter 16, Native American struggles. I'm not sure that I'll get to it. This is like there's almost like two separate things, like the development of capitalism and then workers and how they deal with industry, right? But one of the rationales, you know, when people start making enormous amounts of money, okay, and I mean really enormous amounts of money in this period, it becomes a question like, why do you have $40 million and there are people that are working and still starving, you know? And capitalists will come up with rationales for that, reasons for that, okay? And one of them is, well, we're taking all the risk. If this company goes under, you lose your job and you just go and get another job, maybe. Whereas if this company goes under, I've lost everything. So they're taking greater risk. But as soon as they get into the business, they try to minimize the risk so that so there's less and less risk. And one of the greatest risks comes from competition, right? If there are 30 car companies, as there was at one time in this country, how do you make decisions about how many cars to build? How many cars can you sell? Do you have any idea? There's 30 other competitors there. It's a very complicated, that would be a very complicated decision to make. Whereas if you can get it down to 3 or 4, it becomes easier to, you know, if it's only one company, you know how many you're going to sell, however many populace needs. But how do you get to that point of less competition? Because people are almost okay if there's like wild competition in capitalism. Prices will come down, services, you know, the quality will have to be high in order for a company to survive. It starts with the railroads, basically. They come up with these agreements called pool agreements, where they're not going to go below a certain level, and they sort of divide up the market among themselves. It's sort of a gentleman's agreement. I'm not even sure that they're legal anymore. But they work fine when the economy is rolling good, but as soon as the economy starts to dip, people break out of the pool arrangements and try to save their company and don't give a hoot about the pool agreement. The next step is to form trusts, which are people that own shares in a company trade them for shares in the trust, and the trust gets control of that company, and And a small group, a small trust can control more and more large corporations that make up the trust. Okay, it's a little complicated. It's a little. I'm not sure I get it. Okay, I never took a business management class. But the real move is when I think it's in New Jersey. Let's see. Yes, 1889. The state of New Jersey passed a law that allowed corporations to buy up their rivals. This is mergers. They were a part of our life. I had no idea until a few years ago that that mergers would have been illegal at some point. And once New Jersey makes that change, other states are driven to make that change. Okay? And something I like to point out is that legislators in New Jersey don't get up in the morning one day and say, hey, let's change the corporation laws so that one company can buy up another company. No, there are people that come, Rockefeller hires people or Carnegie hires people. They work out this plan in their head. They might even write the legislation, and then they go to New Jersey or whatever state they've targeted, and they lobby for this legislation. And they say things like, well, if you pass this legislation, corporations will move here, and you'll get those tax revenues and stuff like that. Okay, sounds good. And then they take them out for dinner, and then they slip $1,000 in their pocket. There's a lot of bribery goes on in the old days. So that's how you get to corporations, and basically it leads to total consolidation of of these companies. It says by the end of the 19th century, 1% of the corporations in America were able to control more than 33% of the manufacturing. All right, which is a lot. I wonder what it is today. You have a system where very few men, the great bankers of New York, such as Morgan, industrial titans such as Rockefeller, and others, had enormous economic power. Right. Now, there's a section on capitalism and its critics. I'm going to kind of fly over it. You should definitely read the survival of the fittest part. Social Darwinism is one of the rationales for inequality, wealth inequality. And it basically says it sort of perverts Charles Darwin and says that the people who are successful are better suited for the environment, a business environment, and that's where the success comes from. And people that are on the bottom are there because they're deficient in some way. They're dumb, they're lazy, they're unambitious, something like that. And it's kind of ridiculous because Darwin's theory basically says random mutations take place. A particular sparrow gets spots on its back from random mutation. And then that sparrow is harder for a hawk to see. And therefore, he survives better than another sparrow without spots. And then he's able to pass on that mutation over, millions of years, I guess. And so when Darwin says survival of the fittest, he doesn't mean the strongest, the richest, the smartest necessarily, but who's ever better fitted for the environment. So, and most of these guys, a couple of them are self-made men. That's a fact. Rockefeller and Carnegie Carnegie starts out delivering telegrams on a bike. I don't know if it gets any lower than that. But most of them start out like upper middle class and are able to turn it into big fortunes. All right, I'm gonna skip over those things, and we get to this section. I don't know what it looks like in the 9th edition. Let me take a look. I noticed that the 9th edition has different pictures than the 7th edition. It has really one of my favorites that I might use as a artifact thing. No, it doesn't have that picture. Yeah, I'll come up with some. It has this picture, which is a classic. And if you have the textbook, you can see it. What I think is interesting about this picture is the kid further back. The kid further back, looks like a little worker. He's got coveralls and a little hat, and he's got shoes. The other kid, the kid in the foreground, looks like he just came in off the farm, and he's not wearing any shoes. And think for a second how fast that belt is going. 3,500 revolutions per minute, something like that. If he steps on that or gets close to that, his legs are going to be ripped right off. And he's not wearing shoes. So anyway, there's that. Now the structure of this chapter is all the ideas, all the ways you organize business, all the ways you rationalize wealth inequality and capitalism, and then the workers. And the workers are the key element. I don't care how brilliant your idea is, light bulbs, automobile assembly lines, steel, methods of making steel, the radio, the telephone. If you don't have workers to manufacture the telephones, or to do the steel work, or to man the assembly line, you don't make any money. Capitalism is really, it's all in the hands of the workers. The ownership is in the hands of the capitalists. But the actual production of stuff, Edison didn't build the power plants. Trump didn't build the buildings that he has his name on. Trump Towers in those places. He might have organized the financing, hired the architect, but I grew up in Brooklyn, and it was like every other Italian family that I knew had some grandfather that worked on the Empire State Building. Okay? They actually build the buildings and that kind of thing. All right, so the workers, the ordeal of the workers. It is an ordeal. It was an arduous, hard, not very rewarding life. Right? There was massive immigration into the cities, sometimes from rural areas. They talk about surplus population in places like Massachusetts, where farming has been sort of cut off at the knees because of more efficient farming going on in Michigan and Indiana and places like that. So you end up with extra people, and they come into the cities. There's all these textile plants in Massachusetts they will come into. And then there's immigration from abroad. That's kind of in two phases. They always make this distinction, and I'm not sure it's important distinction. But until the 1880s, it's pretty much what they call northeastern Europe, right? Irish, English, Germans, I guess some Scandinavians, Norwegians, and Swedes, people like that. But then after 1880, it's people from southern Europe, Italy, and Greece, and the Balkans, Romania, where Yugoslavia used to be, from Russia, from Poland, so southern and eastern Europe, okay? That's where, the Jewish immigration is part of that. They don't sort of separate it out, but there are Jewish Poles, and there are Jewish Russians, and there are Jewish other Eastern European countries. And they're mighty oppressed over there. And they're kind of like really second-class citizens. But they come into the cities, and they're sometimes encouraged to come into the cities by capitalist firms that want to have a surplus, like more workers than there are jobs. Why would you want that? Well, because then you can lower wages. People get desperate for a job. They'll work for a quarter a day, something like that. I remember once reading a book about Davy Crockett. So you're talking about the 1820s when he's a little kid, maybe the 1810s, the 18s. And he worked for a quarter a month. So, I don't know. And, but extra workers mean pressure on the workers that are there. They won't complain. They will be reluctant to get involved with a union because they can be fired immediately. And there's always somebody outside the door who can come in. And by this time, the jobs are basically reduced to, 20 minutes is what it takes to do to learn the job. And then you just, do whatever that is for the rest of your days. But this is an important feature of the American working class. Places like Germany, the working class is all German except for a small part that is Polish. And but America has just a rainbow, there's just like every kind of person, You have religious differences, you have racial differences, you have language differences, you have, did I say religious differences? You even have people that are of the same religion that don't want to go to church with each other. Okay? Here in Endicott, there's a St. Anthony's Church up on whatever it is, Oak Hill Avenue or something, and that's like the Italian church. They have a big bazaar in the spring with Zeppelis and Italian stuff and Italian music, etc., etc. Okay, and then 2 blocks away, down whatever street that is, there's St. Casimir's, which is the Polish Catholic Church, and it's like that all over. I mean, in Brooklyn, growing up in Brooklyn, you asked, if you had, I went to Catholic school. We all went to Catholic school. You would ask, what parish were you from? And you could sort of tell who they knew, what ethnicity they were, and all these other things, just by knowing which church they attended. All right? That begins happening here. Now, he says here, at the turn of the century, so that would be 1900, the average income of the American worker was $400 to $500 a year, which was below the $600 figure that many believed was required to maintain a reasonable level of comfort. There's a bunch of things in there. One is, what the hell is a reasonable level of comfort in 1900? You know, do you have two pillows? Is that, how many of you have two pillows? Well, four pillows. You know, how many shoes do you have? Okay. I don't know. $600 a year. Okay, that's a reasonable level of comfort. That means you're eating pretty well. You don't have too many clothes with patches in them. You have shoes that actually function and are not full of holes and stuff like that. But the average is below that, 400 to 500. And the average is always, if the average is 400, it means some people might be making 800 or 900. Some skilled workers might be making 800 or 900, and other people are making 100 or 200. You know, so averages don't tell the whole story. You had no job security. The business cycle was not regulated at all. It went up and down. You could get your wages cut. You could get laid off. You could have your job replaced by a machine very easily. It was tough for a lot of people also to get used to factory labor. You know, if you've been living in, for generations in, Poland as a farmer, you get used to the seasonal ups and downs of things. You get used to waking up with the sunlight, or maybe a little before it. There aren't alarm clocks. You're outside all day, okay? Which can be miserable, I guess, in the winter, but all right a lot of other times. And then you're jammed into this factory that is unhealthy. It has unhealthy air. They close all the windows. They make the windows really narrow so you can't be distracted by anything that's outside. You have an alarm clock now. You have to get up at a certain time and hit the hit the bricks, as it were. Okay. My brother pointed out last night on Facebook that there's a Volvo commercial, the XC90, I think, that shows parents trying to get their kids ready. And in the background, there's this folk singer, Pete Seeger, singing a song about working in a textile mill. And it's kind of a weird matchup. But the song is basically like, 4 o'clock, the alarm goes off, it's time to go to work. Hard Times in the Mill is the name of the song. All right. Let's see. Few workers, in other words, were ever very far from poverty. Right? So it's very different than today's world. There are a lot of people struggling, but this is really struggling. And then he says most factory laborers work 10-hour days, 6 days a week. In the steel industry, they work 12 hours a day. And then he says the killer line to me: industrial accidents were frequent. Anybody know what that means? Industrial accidents were frequent. Did they happen every day in every shop? Did they happen I don't know. How many of them were fatal? You lose a pinky, that's an industrial accident. You lose your life, it's also an industrial accident. Your legs, your arm. I once saw a guy get in the glove, the fingers chopped off. It was his first day on this job in this crappy little steel shop in Newark. On his first day, he lost the tips of all of his fingers. Pretty gruesome. Industrial accidents were frequent. So what you have is a situation where the capitalists are pretty much in control of everything. They can hire the lawyers to write the legislation, to get the New Jersey legislation to legislature to pass laws that benefit them. Okay? They also have phone numbers of elected officials, the governor, the mayor, the governor, even the president. Okay? J.P. Morgan, in a later chapter, they'll say that J.P. Morgan met with Theodore Roosevelt. And I wonder if Roosevelt went to New York or J.P. Morgan came to Washington. But there's no worker, there's no union leader in this era that most workers don't have a telephone, first of all. I'm not sure that the unions would have telephones. But no, the president, the governor, the mayor aren't going to accept calls from those people. So you've got the lawyers, you've got the phone numbers with the elected officials, and the elected officials are always willing to call out troops to put down strikes and other worker protests. Right? Now, one of the things that, after years of teaching this, I've decided to sort of focus on is this fact that capitalists sort of know what they're doing. They know what they want. They know how to get it. They hire brilliant people out of the universities as lawyers or engineers and that kind of thing. The workers don't. The workers are confronted with this brand new world, more or less, that is horrible as far as they're concerned. They're just exploited terribly. And they don't really know what to do about it. Okay? They struggle to form unions. It's tough to decide what the union is supposed to do, and like that. So they run through some organizations. The Molly Maguires, who aren't really a union at all, they're sort of a secret society in the coal fields in Pennsylvania. They're pretty much practicing what was going on in Ireland for generations against landlords. They're practicing that against coal mine operators, blowing up the mines and that kind of thing. Not really a union, though. The next group is the Knights of Labor, who were closer to an actual union. They start out as a secret society. I guess secret societies are the way to go if anybody talking about a union is going to get fired. The only people they actually let housewives in as people that toiled, they said, that worked. Only lawyers, bankers, liquor dealers, and professional gamblers were excluded, which I think is a good collection of corrupt people. Lawyers and bankers and liquor dealers and gamblers. They championed an 8-hour day. They called for the abolition of child labor. But they were more interested in sort of a long-range reform of the economy. Now, I'm not exactly sure what that means, but they wanted to replace the wage system with a new cooperative system in which the workers themselves would control the workplaces. Sounds a little like socialism, but nobody ever called it that. They have a kind of up and down history. They peak at some point in the 1886, right? Now, next is the American Federation of Labor, which is still in existence today. It merges, I think, in the 50s with the Congress of Industrial Organizations to form the major labor federation in the country today. The AFL is a group of, it's a federation of individual unions that mainly are dealing with skilled workers, people who a capitalist would need to get the job done, and who have specific skills and can't be replaced all that easily. Right? So, you know, steam fitters, I don't know, all sorts of things. Electricians these days. So it has a limited membership. It's not the whole working class, but it's the limited membership that is able to have power vis-a-vis the capitalists. So, and they concentrate solely on what's called bread and butter issues: shorter hours, better wages, better conditions. They're not looking to change the system or radically alter things and that kind of stuff. They do get involved in this a general strike for the 8-hour day in 1886 that is partly successful. But at the same time that strike is called for, May 1st, 1886, there's a strike already going on in Chicago and at the McCormick Harvester Company. And that strike is going to lead to a bombing incident and sort of a police shooting of the crowd, into the crowd sort of randomly. And then there are cries for retribution, and they can't find the guy. They don't have any evidence about the guy that threw the bomb or the woman that threw the bomb. Okay, so they end up arresting these 8 anarchists who gave speeches that day and blamed them for inciting the riot or the bomber. Okay. There's another 2 strikes that are important: the Homestead Strike and the Pullman Strike. You should read about those, okay? Somebody should make a movie out of the Homestead Strike, because there's a scene in there where the workers pour gasoline on the river and set fire to it. And these Pullman detectives who are coming up on a barge have to surrender because they're sailing on a flaming river, right? But read those. But also keep in mind that these are like spectacularly violent episodes. The Pullman Strike, the Homestead Strike, and that in the background there's a lot of pushing and a lot of organizing and a lot of negotiating between workers and factory owners and small shops and stuff like that. Behind this stuff that sort of portrays the workers as insane is stuff where they're actually pursuing different things. Now, the story of the working class in America, you know, it's going to start here. It's not really going to be too successful through the 1900s. The 1920s are sort of dead for the unions. And there's all this pushing of company unions and stuff like that. But in the Depression, in the 1930s, there's a labor movement that arises. And it becomes connected to this Congress of Industrial Organizations, which is capable of organizing like all the unskilled workers. Women, blacks, white people on the line who aren't skilled workers into unions. And they force the companies to recognize the unions, which is the hard thing to get done when you're a union organizer. They use sit-down strikes, they use these other things. And what that does is it puts all these people in unions on the eve of World War II. And so when World War II happens and you have to increase production tremendously, all of those workers are union workers. And then coming out of World War II, it's probably the main reason for the prosperity of workers. By the 1950s, workers can buy houses, which is unheard of previously. Buy a house, buy a car for your daughter, send your kids to college, buy a big refrigerator, fill it with food, a completely different lifestyle. But it comes from union membership. Okay. Now, in between that, between the late, the Pullman strike and the CIO in the 30s, there's an organization that I like to talk about called the Industrial Workers of the World. They get formed in 1905, so they were a little bit late for this chapter. They're kind of the ideal is get everybody in the same union and then have a general strike, and the capitalism will collapse, which of course hasn't happened and probably won't happen. But they're sort of a very political, very colorful political group. And I'll tell some more stories maybe on the next tape. But this is 46 minutes. Okay, that's too much anyway. Let's see. I am going to set up an artifact assignment for this chapter. There are some great drawings and cartoons of, criticizing capitalism or that kind of thing. There's one called, I found it yesterday, The Class Struggle, 1911. It's like a cake with the richest people up top, and down at the bottom the workers are holding everything up, which seems to be a popular theme, right? I did put up instructions about the paper, the first paper, and it would be good to take a look at that and get started. I think the due date is the 14th of October. All right, so there you have it. Have a good day. Bye-bye.